would be for a good-sized garden where she could grow her own fruit and vegetables. How she would have enjoyed that, and the sight of her family's faces as she fed them food grown by her own hand. She gave a short sigh. Fat chance of that ever happening. Nobody she knew had a garden, not a proper one. Everybody had backyards, some bigger than others. That was a fact of life in Dalston. The terraces of houses weren't built for gardening. There was room for a washing line and maybe some pots if you were lucky. Anything more was just a dream. This was the East End of London, after all. Besides, Patty counted herself as lucky in many other ways. She loved their house. Even though it was near the main road that ran from Stamford Hill and beyond, all the way down to Liverpool Street and the city, the actual terrace of houses was called Victory Walk, with no traffic passing by to bother them with noise. While their home was no palace, it was as spick and span as she could make it, and with just about enough space for everybody. She and her husband Bert had the big bedroom facing the front, and their oldest son Peter had had the smaller room behind that. She drew in a breath at the thought of him. Her beloved boy had recently joined the army, going off to train at the start of the summer. She was proud of his choice, but it didn't mean she wasn't worried. The bedroom facing over the backyard was shared by Clover and Daisy, which no doubt partly explained why they argued so much. Robbie, the youngest of the family, was tucked into the smallest room, not much more than a box room really, next to the main bedroom. The Harrisons' firstborn child no longer lived at home. To their immense pride, Rose had qualified as a nurse and now lived at the nurses' home attached to the hospital over at Homerton. It was only a bike ride away, and she still came back whenever she could, but Patty acknowledged that she missed her clever, steady eldest far more than she would ever admit out loud. Not least because Rose had a lifetime's experience of settling disputes between her two rowdier sisters. As if reading her mother's mind, Clover set down her teacup and asked, "Isn't Rose here? It's her afternoon off, isn't it?" Patty nodded. She was going to meet Robbie after school as she'd promised to take him for a tea cake when she was here on Sunday. She smiled to hide yet another worry. Robbie was a constant headache. Sometimes she was astonished that he'd made it to the grand old age of 10. He'd been so sickly as a baby. If there had been an illness going around, he'd caught it, and always worse than any of the others. All winter long he would struggle with bronchitis, the sound of his laboured breathing from his cramped room haunting her as she tried to sleep. She couldn't help fussing over him, even when he wasn't ill. Protecting your children was the first duty of any mother. It could have made him spoilt and timid, but if anything, it was the reverse. If there was trouble, Robbie would be right there in the middle of it. Still, he couldn't get into mischief if Rose was looking after him. And it was August, warm and sunny and dry, all good for Robbie's poorly lungs. Patty took a last sip of her tea and stretched out her legs under the wooden table. She should make the most of such moments. Soon she would have to get to her feet and begin preparing the evening meal. But for now, her children were safe and well and fed, and who knew how long that would last. "Shoes, Robbie! Wipe them straight away. Doesn't matter if they aren't muddy, they'll still bring in stuff from the pavement." Rose stood over her little brother, knowing that she shouldn't have to check that he knew what to do, but also knowing that if he brought dirt into the hall, it wouldn't be him who had to clear it up. Robbie shrugged and dutifully scraped his feet across the doormat. His thin summer plimsolls were wearing out, but they'd only be needed for a few more weeks. Rose nodded and he ran up the stairs, away from the grown-ups and their increasingly worried discussions. She made her way into the kitchen, where her mother and two sisters were sitting at the table, empty teacups in front of them. Patty noticed the direction of her gaze and made to stand up. "Would you like a cuppa?" Rose smiled and shook her head, taking a seat beside Clover. "I had plenty while Robbie had his tea cake." She sighed. "Have you thought any more about what to do with..."